All right, let's see how many people we have. See, the amount of participants are flowing in. It's quite awesome. Excellent. So welcome, everyone. So welcome to the Agile for Hardware webinar. My name is Hajou, and I'll be your host today. Today, I'm actually helped with organizing all this stuff, making sure that whatever we see over here is actually working. So I'm completely supported and in safe hands of my colleague Jordan, which is a little bit outside of whatever you see over here. So Jordan, would you be able to make a sound so that people believe that I'm not talking to a ghost?
Yes, I'm Jordan, and I'll be moderating your question. So enjoy the webinar.
Excellent. So welcome to the webinar. I'll be sharing a little bit of information about the Agile for Hardware course that we've been creating, but more than that, the whole topic of working Agile in an environment that is not, well, how do you call it? Not typically considered to be, let's say, a sort of good, solid ground for Agile practices. So, you can ask questions during this webinar. We have an hour in total, and we're recording this from the beautiful soil of the Netherlands. We've seen that there are quite a lot of people that have registered to attend from all over the world, so that's quite nice to basically see how this Agile thing can also float your boat in a completely non-software environment. So at the moment that you have any questions, you'd be able to share them, or you'd be able to type them into your Zoom tool, I would say, or whatever tool you're using. So the moment that you've asked a question, my colleague Jordan, which is right here again, will mention the questions, and then we can go through them. So really into your hands as well, but I'm quite happy to share a little bit of information about the cool stuff that we've been doing with this Agile for Hardware course. Some logistical things, the moment that you do not hear me that well, please let me know. Just type it again into the chat box, and we'll try to do something about it on the fly. Good. So let's start. Let me introduce myself a little bit, so that you know who is talking over here. Hajou. I'm born in 1987, and I've been an Agile geek since 2009. Essentially, I've been an Agile geek since I've started working in a small company in a city in the Netherlands, in Nijmegen, for those that are from the Netherlands. And that company created or was a marketing authorization holder for a medication, for an actual, like a very powerful piece of medication. And in the software that they created in order to monitor these patients, the interesting thing that I saw was they created more documents, or spend more time working on documentation rather than on the actual software. Whether it's testing it, developing it, thinking about it, brainstorming whatsoever, design with more documentation than the functionality. And I found that really interesting. I really found that really interesting because, developing something should be sort of a hands-on thing. Trying to understand what is being created and trying to test it out and trying to feel it somehow, and hopefully learn whether you're doing the right things or the wrong things. So ever since, I thought, you know what, we could do the work a little bit differently. And back then, Scrum was quite a huge thing. It still is, and it's been it sort of propelled my Agile journey ever since. And since then, I've been able to be a consultant in the Agile way of working, and more specifically in sculpting the Agile way of working in such a way that it fits the local environment. Because I thought that's how it should be done. Every team is different, every company is different, every environment is different, and the market is different. So there cannot be a sort of a one generic picture that fits every team, every organization, every process. It cannot be the case. So I spent my time ever since essentially kneading the dough of Agile so that it fits, the team that has asked for my help. And I'm doing that using a couple of official job titles. You can see them on the screen, which is a trainer for Agile for hardware, and I'm training or I'm giving the trainings for Agile teams, but also whenever you have an environment with multiple Agile teams, which we call scaled Agile, or in a scaling Agile environment. So I've been doing that for quite a while, and more and more in environments where there is no software being made. So think about an environment where we have a marketing team or marketing teams, and they create the content for our own websites, they create flyers, they create the promotional materials for a large company, but still they want to figure out whether they can deliver either quicker, whether they can sort of cut away the important stuff and do that from the stuff that was considered work but was not necessary after all. So essentially be able to respond on whatever they see, whatever they hear a little more quicker. So this Agile thing became something for more than just software teams. And I thought that I love that. I thought there was, that's what I like. That's my sort of not really expertise, but that's what I like to do. So then lately, the last 3 years, if I can call it like that, it's more and more environments where software is not even a thing. We're creating physical product. But then how do you work Agile in an environment where you create physical products? How do you create something tangible when Scrum or when other Agile practices state that you should have a very short iteration with a sort of tangible proof at the end of that iteration? Sometimes you cannot create anything like that. So I found that wildly awesome. So I had the luck to join a really cool company that where I can work, and where we give these kind of trainings. This company is the Gladwell Group. So the Gladwell Group is combining Gladwell Academy, which is a partner at Scrum.org and is a scaled Agile partner, and Blink Lane Consulting that does consultancy in these large-scale transformations of going from a way of working to an Agile way of working. Quite awesome, big projects. So the Gladwell Group comprises quite a lot of activities, and it supplies training activities, coaching, consulting, and more than that, consulting for organizational change. So it's quite broad, but essentially anything that you need in order to, essentially have a transformation. So we're located in the Netherlands primarily, but we have offices in India, in the US, and we have offices in France. So a little bit, let me ask you a question, a little bit sort of a teaser kind of thing. Just yesterday, I opened Google and I typed in Google Trends, which is a tool that Google has where you can see the popularity of certain terms. And I just typed in Agile, the term Agile. And sorry for whatever you see on the screen, it's in Dutch, but it gives you the impression. The term Agile has been increasingly popular somewhere since what I would say 2010, 2011, it became almost 4 times as popular. So Google has a certain algorithm that shows how popular a certain term is. So the moment that it's very popular in their, let's say, well, within their definition of very popular, then it reaches the 100% score. It's sort of the 100-point score. And essentially, since 2017, if I can call it like that, since about 2017, there have been quite a lot of spikes that touch upon that 100% score. So this Agile thing is really a thing. There are quite a lot of people that are searching for, for the term Agile in this case. What they do about it, or where does the question come from? No idea. But the fact that there is such an interest in the term Agile, well, it means something. More and more companies are doing something with it. There are an increasing amount of people that have been following Agile trainings. And I find that quite intriguing because simultaneously there is a sort of a sense that the term Agile, which is, it's a vague term in the first place. It comprises some values, it comprises of some principles, which you need to interpret anyway. But it is whatever is considered Agile is not directly related or can be sort of linked to the environment of physical hardware development. So a couple of quotes that I got from some documents that implementing Agile practices in companies dealing with non-pure software products is challenging, and simultaneously going into a certain direction might fail you because we did not have an integrated system-level testing or demonstration until late in development. The documentation or the quotes that I read out are actually from documents that state that they have been working Agile or trying to work Agile in an environment of mechatronics, electronics, or in the latter one, actually in working Agile to create the new F-22 jet fighter by Lockheed Martin. So the article itself is quite awesome because essentially what they're explaining over there is that they have been trying to create the modules, the software, the interfaces, essentially most of the airplane in an iterative way. But standard practices do not apply. Standard practices, the so-called standard sprint planning and review, at the moment that it is not interpreted for the local environment, it does not work out of the box. So that's I found that intriguing. I mean, that's what I like. That's what I like to do. And the point is that this one way of working, the so-called silver bullet, the so-called Agile, is just a thing that we can just grab and install into a company, and voila, the company becomes very fast and awesome. It doesn't work that way. The point is that we need to tweak the way of working in such a way that it fits the local environment. It's even the first line of the Agile Manifesto. If you look at the Agile Manifesto, which is essentially where all of this came from, it has been written and published in 2001, containing the core values that you can see right now in on the screen. The first line, the absolute first line, states that we're uncovering better ways of developing solutions, developing something of value by doing it and by helping others to do it. So by definition, we need to uncover a way of working that works better for your local environment. So coming back to this Agile for hardware thing. So as a consultant, we've been trying out a lot of implementations, a lot of helping out a lot of teams in finding their own ways of working. And essentially we get continuously the same question. So how does it work? Show me a picture. Show me the best practice. And it doesn't work like that, because what might be a best practice for one team is not the best practice or something that is usable for the other. So our, let's just say, the tricks that we use when we are searching new ways of working, when we are searching something that is applicable for an environment that has been using the V model for quite a while, that has verification and validation, let's say, embedded in their practices, that has suppliers with very long lead times in delivery, and more than that, maybe suppliers that require the expertise from you or from your teams to develop something because they cannot do that themselves, because the expertise is with you. Having this environment requires you to find an own way of working. So we created a course around it, and the course itself has been quite successful up until now, because it doesn't give you, sort of one picture that you can use. It gives you a practice and some tricks that you can use either in a workshop format or that you can use in searching for something that works better for your local environment. And our trick is essentially is by doing it in looking to your value stream. Essentially what it means is, rather than looking at how do you do your work on a team level, or how do you organize multiple teams together, let's take one step backwards. So let's take one step backwards and look at the larger steps that we take in order to deliver something of value. So essentially turning something of an idea, a request, into something that we can deliver to the customer, and therefore that the customer is happy with it, and therefore pays us, and therefore we earn, which allows us to invest something, invest into either the value stream, and basically prolonging the activities of the value stream, and investing into the ideas, which might be more of from an innovation perspective, right? Let's try things out. So the whole course has been surrounded by the value stream, and looking at the value stream and trying to optimize that. And with that, the iterative way of working, extreme manufacturing, the principles from extreme manufacturing, modular, let's say, creating your product in a more modular fashion, allowing you to go through the value stream quicker, with part of the value stream essentially and a part of the product going to the value stream quicker, allows you to, well, essentially figure out whether the product that you've been creating, even if it's not in the hands of the customer yet, whether it's the correct thing, whether it works, and whether, whenever you've integrated it with other compartments, other modules, whether it works together. So the value stream itself, which is a list of activities that are required to transform a customer request into a good or a service. Quote from an awesome, really good book called Value Stream Mapping from Karen Martin and Mike Oosterling. The value stream allows you to essentially have a sort of a baseline where you can look at and then try to implement various practices that most of us call agile practices, and then test whether it indeed increases the speed of the value stream. So the thing is, the value streams that we know in hardware development environments are, let's say, quite risky. What do I mean with that? A value stream is a couple of steps, and after every step, we would like to check whether we are on track. And in hardware development, and hardware development specifically, the changes that are made further on in the value stream, so later in the process, become more expensive. So essentially the cost of change increases over time. And usually what you see is that there are a lot of practices and activities that are done in order to make sure that we do not continue with development before we're really sure that whatever we've been creating is tested, it's approved, it's agreed upon, it's complete, and etc. In itself, that's okay, because in itself, it's the quality gates are there to protect us for unintended expenses later on. But these gates, they sort of reinforce themselves, which means that over time, these gates become larger and larger and larger. Therefore, more documents are requested and mandatory, and more effort needs to be done in order to even get through that process step. So I saw that there was a question already. So awesome.
Yeah. The question is by Nikhil. Can you please provide an analogy explaining how the earnings/feedback for hardware products or projects are early with Agile compared to waterfall model?
All right, good question. So there is this notion that let me rephrase it to the return on investment, and it probably not completely and will not completely answer the question, but makes the questioning and maybe the answering a little easier. If we look at return on investment, ideally it is you look forward and you would like to sort of calculate the moment when you can reap the benefits of whatever you've been doing, and essentially that the value is delivered to the customer. The customer sees that there is value in it, and therefore there is return on investment. With the Agile way of working, you're trying to figure out what is necessary, what is just enough, if I can call it like that, in order to deliver that product to the customer. So essentially, you're continuously checking whether we've developed enough, whether we have covered our, let's say, knowledge gaps, our the problems that the solution, let's say the product that you're trying to create, whether the problem is solved with that, and you're trying to check that out. You try to figure that out more frequently. So in the Agile Manifesto, there is a principle, which is Principle 10 for those that really like to research that, which is that simplicity, which is the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. So the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential, meaning that you would like to have your point, let's say, point of delivery early on, but that's not always the case. I mean, you cannot always do that, but you would like to sort of do the least amount of effort in order to be able to deliver whatever you want to deliver. And that some people call it less gold plating, and other people call it trying to get it into the market more quickly. But in hardware development, you cannot do that very, very often, because the products that you deliver cannot be updated via an app on your phone, because if you sell a physical product that might hang inside a house, or that might run inside a shop floor of a factory for years after years. So you need to think about that up front. So the delivery time, if I can call it like that, which in lean terms is usually called the lead time, that is usually not changed. What is changed, however, is your risk exposure over time, because you check more often in your value stream, in most of your value stream, whether you're doing the right thing or not. So I hope that that answers the question a little bit, and we'll continue upon it in the rest of the story of the webinar. So the point is that if we what we're trying to do, what you're trying to find in this, let's say, with an Agile way of working, is a sort of a moment in your value stream for which you have a couple of steps where you can go through very quickly, and then there are a couple of steps that are, that take some more time, which you usually see as as a couple of phase gates that you sort of press together in order to be able to iterate very quickly through the first few steps. And then on the screen you see that there are a couple of, in this sort of hypothetical example, there's an initiation phase, a definition phase, a planning phase, and an execution phase. And ideally you would like to go through them very quickly, very often, which with just a small piece of work, and initiate, let's say, creating whatever you want to create, define what you want to create, and therefore the documentation and the design and the schematics, if that's needed for it. You plan that in short iterations, and you execute, and therefore you create maybe a proof of concept, maybe a design, maybe an actual working product. For a lot of, let's say, for a lot of devices, that's not possible, because in this, in this example, the red sort of marker would be probably a step back, but then you'd be able to iterate through the other 3 steps. So essentially what we need to find is, out of all the steps that we have, where can we put that needle? And can we iterate very quickly before that needle, and then continuously ask ourselves, is this enough? Have we covered our, let's just say, the intent of what we wanted to create? Is the product that we create up to spec, up to customer spec, or do we need to do something more? So essentially, that is the search. The search is not so much whether we need to use Scrum or opposed to another framework or another method. The method or the framework or these practices, they should help you in figuring out whether you become faster in your value stream. So essentially, our struggle is to find verifiable proof, which means what can we sort of create in order to know that we're on the right track, in order to know that we can integrate one product to the other product, or other submodule to the other submodules, to figure out whether it works together, and therefore limit the integration risk that we might have if we postpone it and integrate our subproduct, if I can call it like that, the components maybe, to a very late moment in time. So we would like to figure out whether we can demonstrate an integrated product early on. And but it really differs per team, and it really differs per, let's say, even phase of a project you're in. And I can share an example that we have at this moment that I'm working with at this moment. So I'm helping out a couple of teams that are working in an environment where they create huge machines that essentially work in lithography fashion to create semiconductors. So these machines that have the ability to create semiconductors, so they're like tiny chips, it takes a long time to create. They're extremely expensive, and it takes a long time before specification is turned into something really physical. And more than that, it requires quite a lot of time to research what material we need to use, what kind of components we need to order, or whether we should order material. Maybe we can create it ourselves as well. Whether it fits the bill of materials, and therefore whether it's maybe, whether it's cheap enough, if I can call it like that, cheaper than buying it off the shelf. All of these things take a lot of time. You would not be able to design and develop and test and integrate a certain module, all of that into a very short period of time. You cannot do that. But the question is, what is our verifiable proof? Do we have a design that I can show, which is probably not complete, but that I can show in order to get feedback from my peers, maybe even feedback from the people that will integrate the subproduct, the module that I'm busy with later on, and so that I can get feedback, so I can learn whether I'm doing the right thing, even though the design is not finished yet. More than that, the moment that I do have a physical component, is there a way for me to test that more, and therefore figure out whether the physical component integrates very well in the overall architecture. And therefore, doing multiple steps very frequently, and then essentially presenting the results at the end of a very short iteration. And you can call them a sprint, but essentially in very short iteration, learning whether we are doing the right thing. So a couple examples on this slide is, are we up to spec? If not, then what should we continue to work on? And that would basically initiate your next iteration. And that's how you continue until you hopefully get the sort of the green light because you are up to spec, or there are more let's say pressing things to be worked on rather than that one. So this is good enough, if I can call it like that. So keep in mind, you're not talking about good enough in terms of quality, but good enough in terms of following the specification. And we can continue with another piece of work. So that is our struggle. And our struggle, so during the course, our struggle is to find first of all, what's the bottleneck in the value stream. So is that we have suppliers that can, and only suppliers that can give us feedback, and therefore continuous feedback takes actually a very long time. Is that our bottleneck? Or is it that we actually don't know what is valuable, what is not valuable, what works very well and what does not work very well? So the thing is, during the course, we tend to, let's say, try to find the bottleneck of, where things become more difficult, more expensive maybe, will take more time. And how about seeing that as that, let's say, a red needle, the one that you just saw on the screen? Essentially, sort of how about we figure out whether we can iterate until that moment, and then find out what is our, let's say, our verifiable proof. Is that something that we can make, let's say, that we can measure and therefore make quantitative? Because the moment that becomes our, let's say, measure, we know that we can optimize both our process, but maybe also the piece of work that we work on in order to, let's just say, get through the bottleneck, in order to deliver, in order to go to that next step, which might be a more expensive step. So it sort of allows you to see what is sort of a delaying factor in your process and what is not a delaying factor in your process. We see a lot that companies employ agile practices because it's the thing to do in 2019. It's target for 2019. We're going to implement agile. We don't really know why, but a lot of companies do that, so let's do that. And the thing is, then it sort of becomes a sort of a, how can I call it? It's sort of like a dance, a ceremonial dance, and we don't really know why we're doing it, because essentially what we're doing is we're putting our traditional project and the traditional way of working, our traditional work breakdown structure, into a backlog or into an agile team, but we just plan our work in short periods of time, which it negates what we're trying to achieve over here. We're trying to figure out whether we can become faster in a certain way. But in order to do that, you need to be able to understand how slow or how fast you are at this moment. So essentially, it is not about becoming faster or becoming the first. It's essentially being able to respond faster on the learnings. It's essentially the analogy that I'm making over here. It's not so much the first mover's advantage, but with this agile way of working, you're trying to become faster and therefore have a fastest moving advantage. Responding faster to what the client wants, but more than that, responding faster to whether your module works with another module, responding faster to the test results that come back from verification and validation, or the teams that should integrate your product into the, let's say, their larger architecture. So learning earlier whether you need to sort of pivot your work or not. I think that's That's where the magic happens. And essentially, the Agile practices that we know, and you can Google, and there are many of them, which allows you, lands you at Scrum and Crystal and the Scale to Agile framework and Less and Nexus, and all of them are really good. But the moment that you sort of follow them just to follow them, it you do not reap the benefits. So there, during the course, we're trying to take that into the back of our minds, and then sort of find the pieces that work very well together in order to become faster, in order to have a better, more well-oiled value stream. So the practice is essentially secondary. Trying to look at the whole value stream, that's primary. So essentially, we're trying to create small projects, because right now, if you look at small projects, a small project is something that is sort of more overseeable. It's better to plan. We sort of know what needs to be done, and larger projects have a larger slippage. We tend to over plan that. We don't really know exactly what needs to be done. It's just maybe too much. And therefore, the risk exposure in larger projects is just larger. And our point is, how about we see our work in such a way that we can have essentially small projects. And therefore, essentially, we can iterate through the value stream, and that in itself, one iteration, is a sort of a project where for every tiny project, we design something, we create something, we try to test something, and we try to learn something, which basically means that overall you have a sort of a verifiable tiny project. And a tiny project has less of a project slippage. So it's more overseeable, and you have the ability to maneuver your way of working, but you have the ability to maneuver what you're doing. So essentially maneuver the work, and therefore see what is the important work, if I can call it like that, something that is really necessary for creating value, and what is, if I can call it like that, relatively less important. So during the course, we're talking actually about quite a bit of, let's say, constructs on what might be useful for you, and because essentially, if you have a class, and we have a couple of open enrollment classes, the class comprises of multiple participants, each of one coming from a completely different environment. Whether it's aeronautics to a company creating submarines, to a company creating phone covers, every company has its own process, and therefore every company has its own needs. So there are quite a lot of practices and tools that we look at, both from the perspective of being able to create something, and therefore looking at the product itself, but also from the perspective of project management. Because the moment that you have a iteration that allows you to very quickly learn whether whatever you've been doing is the correct one, and therefore, in my opinion, that's more interesting. You have the continuous check whether you can stop certain activities because relatively they're less important, they're less valuable. Therefore, you can sort of move that away, move that out of your backlog. It's a completely different let's say sort of a paradigm shift right over there, because then traditional project management and therefore traditional planning does not really work anymore. So essentially, what we're trying to do is hope that you have a sort of a toolbox with a lot of tools that you can use, which is, might be useful in a certain phase of your project, and have that as as your own local toolbox, and being able to see your value stream and being able to continuously monitor that and tweak the way of working along the way, and doing that empirically, doing that based on the actual outcome of your mini projects. So if you'd like to see more about that, or if you would like to read more about let's say the course and Agile for Hardware, The course itself, you can find when these are on the website of Gladwell Academy, gladwellacademy.com, or you can go to the agilehardware.eu for some more information about the event that we just had, and the course itself. And more than that, you have the ability to download a free white paper that I've created together with a colleague, containing basically all the sort of the eye-openers that we saw in, let's say, the application of Agile practices in an environment of physical products, which is freely downloadable. If you go to one of these two links, you'd be able to scroll down a little bit and then click on download the free white paper. Excellent read, and more than that, I'd like to hear from you what you think. So with that, I'm finished essentially my 40 minutes, and I've I hope you had some let's say some insights of how we do the work and what is sort of in the course, and I'm open for questions. So if you have any questions, please type them in, and I'll try my best to answer them one by one. So let's see whether questions are coming in. Got it. So the question is the course online? Good question. The course itself is a classroom course. We've been doing it in two ways up until now. So we have an open enrollment course, which is scheduled either, so it has been scheduled in the Netherlands. There's a training in Berlin, and there's another one in Boston. But those are open enrollment ones, and it's scheduled as an in-company training. So you'd be able to, apply for it, which basically means go to the website and be able to contact Gladwell Academy and ask for a quote. But essentially, it's what I really like about the course is that most of the course, or maybe the sort of the most impactful part of the course, is that it is, maybe most of it is sort of a workshop. You're plotting, you're creating, and you're viewing and designing essentially your own value stream, the one that is currently in existence. And then by going through some materials and we're sharing some tricks that we use essentially, and we explain how Scrum works and essentially what the intent is behind it, et cetera, et cetera. If you try to apply that onto your own value stream, what happens then? So you calculate the sort of the lead time again, and therefore you can see what the bottlenecks are. You could also see what the overall let's say efficiency is of your value stream. So by starting with your own value stream, learning the tricks of Agile and what Agile can bring, and let's say the improvements and maybe also some of the difficulties that it introduces, you can sort of see what kind of effect it has on your own value stream, which is which I like a lot. Which basically means that at the end of the training, people can go home with a lot of ideas on how they can apply Agile practices in their own environment, because they've been plotting it, they've been experimenting with it essentially during the course. So that's quite cool, and I hope that answers a little bit it's a little bit of a huge answer for your question, but I hope it answers your question. So thanks a lot, Per. All right, the next question is, are you changing the processes while introducing Agile, or how are you adapting it? So it's a good question, because the point of Agile is that Agile is not a process in itself. And that's maybe a little bit semantic kind of thing. Agile is a set of values and a set of practices. which means that you need to interpret that in order to create your own way of working. But there are agile methods that have been created that are, let's say, that follow these values and that follow these principles in order to allow you to work agile, in order to implement and therefore form your way of working. And Scrum is one of those things. Scrum tells you what the meetings are, it tells you what the events, that's how it's called, tells you what the roles are, it tells you what the artifacts are. The Agile Manifesto doesn't do that. So if I can call it like that, if you look at Scrum, you'd like to keep that as basic as possible, because essentially Scrum is sort of, they really cleaned out all the excess in order to come up with a very lean, very thin, very absolute basic fundamental framework. You might interpret it slightly differently in order to use it in a hardware environment, because a potentially shippable increment at the end of a 2-week sprint, it might not be possible if you're a company that makes cameras, because these physical cameras require a lot of components, and it takes a long time before something like that is created. So you need to find another form of proof, if I can call it like that. So you're not changing the process, you're not changing that, but you're looking at another form of proof that allows you to learn whether you've been doing inside that sprint, which is still Scrum, whether it's correct or not, whether it has impact on your team or it has impact on other teams. So essentially, it's the process itself. I mean, if we're talking about Scrum, the process is the same, but the intent is maybe slightly nuanced. All right. Then I have another question about whether the course is targeting leadership, so those who know the value stream, or is it targeting developers, designers who do the work? So at this moment, we had a mix of people in the room, and to be honest, the developers, the engineers, or let's say people that are part of engineering, they get the most value out of it, because we can very quickly, we go into the material, we go into the work, and therefore we need to understand what we need to do in order to create, let's say, or transform some specification into a design, into a more technical design, into some schematics, and into some, let's say, a verifiable, maybe already build a PCB or something like that. So you really go into the details of how you do your work. And I tend to see that the people that are really close to the work, if I can call it like that, they get the most benefit, because they, one of the steps is, one of the tricks is to really look at the big picture, look at the complete value stream. Where are the potential downfalls, the potential bottlenecks, the potential delays, and the potential, things that you might be able to improve. And then during the day, which is a 2-day course, by the way, so during the 2 days, you come up with a lot of ideas on how to become faster and how to become more, agile in a way. So with that, you're essentially collecting a lot of ideas for improvement. And in order to be able to implement those improvements, you'd probably need leadership. So we had some heads of engineering in the class, but luckily they were close to the let's say development environment. So I think right now they are the ones that really benefit from the class. Yeah. All right. Then the next question is from Martin. With value stream mapping, are you meaning the lean value stream mapping by identifying Muda, etc.? Good question. So it's less than that. It's not the complete part. If we look at the value stream, so we plot the value stream, and then which is, I would say, part of what you do in value stream mapping. Then you have a picture, but then you need to do something with the picture, which essentially means we'll talk about the agile practices, and what if we apply the Agile practices onto the value stream? What is happening then? And therefore, you calculate whether you become faster until a certain extent. We look at other practices, like if we try to create or slice our work into a different angle, and therefore essentially create continuous proof of concepts, which might be sort of strenuous in the beginning, or which might not follow our current way of working that much. But what if that's the approach? Therefore, we create a lot of proof of concepts, and therefore learn quicker. Is that maybe an approach? And if we do that, what does that mean for the speed of our value stream? And therefore, what does that mean for the speed of our learning? So we use the value stream essentially just to see their bigger picture and what the impact is of an agile way of working, essentially a framework, a way of working onto the value stream. So essentially, the value stream is just a trick, and we see how that applies to you. Essentially, that's what we're trying to do. All right, then the question. It sounds like project leads and architects, question mark. Do you go into, probably those are two questions. So it sounds like project leads and architects, probably the people that might attend the course or that might benefit the course a lot. The moment that we're talking about project leads that have, let's say, a product focus, they understand how things are developed, maybe don't have all the details of how things need to be developed, what kind of material we need to use and whatsoever, but really have let's say, a good overview of what is the work that needs to be done in order to develop a new version of the product, for instance, or a patch, if you call it like that. Yeah, then maybe the PL might be a good one. Usually the architects are good people that have that information, and therefore that have the ability to sort of zoom out a little bit in order to find improvements in the way of working and therefore in the value stream. So yeah, I think architects would be good here as well. Yeah. Then the question, next question is, do you go into how to track work? And mention Jira or Rally, etc., and what ceremonies and how to run them. So, in short, yes. A little bit more nuanced answer is that we try to become or to maintain ourselves to be tool agnostic as much as possible. Simply because there are so many tools, and each of the tools has their quirks. Some of them are really good for software, others are really good for electrical engineers, others are really good for a lot of teams that work in an environment that we call the skilled agile environment, so with a lot of agile teams with PI planning and whatsoever. So it really depends on the local organization and local environment, if I can call it like that. The thing is, we do go into a lot of these ceremonies, a lot of these practices, because you need to find the ceremony or the interpretation of a ceremony that fits very well with you. And how do you do that? By testing it onto the value stream. So we go through, let's say, ways of demoing your work, essentially, so ways of having a sprint review or a system demo, or how you want to call it. And testing that out onto the value stream, which basically means overall, if we have an integrated demo, which is more difficult, it takes more time, we need to organize it, but also teams need to spend time in order to integrate their work into the work of other teams, which means on net, they can pick up less work in a short iteration, right? What does that mean for the overall value stream? So having a sort of an individual demo, does that mean that we can, we win some time later on, or we lose some time later on because we have more integration time? If that integration doesn't happen frequently inside the sprint or inside the short iteration. So essentially, we're continuously testing which ceremonies have what kind of effect on your value stream, your overall big picture, if I can call it like that. So I hope that answers your question, Per. All right. So I think by now, we went through all the questions. That's quite nice. We're really interested in what you think about this. Let's say these kind of webinars. First of all, the material that has been presented, and the material that you might find on the website, because it's, again, take a look on it. Especially if you go to the agilehardware.eu website, you can click on the video that gives you like a sort of an impression of what happened in the previous Agile for Hardware event, which was hosted in July, which had people from a lot of companies, and one of them was, for instance, from Lockheed Martin, explaining how Lockheed Martin does its work in short cycles, creating jet fighters, and a lot of really interesting projects. And you have and you can click through to the white paper, which means you'd be able to download that freely. You can go through it. It gives you an overview of what Agile for Hardware means for us, and what is therefore put into the training. Really looking forward to what you think, which means that after this webinar, we'll send around a small questionnaire to essentially ask you what you think. So we would really appreciate you to give back this information, and hopefully see you very soon again. So thanks a lot. If you have any questions, let us know. We'll remain to be available via in the website, in the email that you received. There is an email address that you can contact, so you can send us emails about these things, and hope to see you very soon. All right, thank you, and thanks a lot.